Commander Jake Morrison stared through the observation deck window of the UES Endeavour as the stars moved slowly past. The ship was humanity's first vessel built specifically for meeting aliens, though Jake often wondered if they would ever find any. 3 months had passed since the end of the Martian Liberation War, and Earth was still counting the dead. 23 million people had died fighting the hegemony forces that tried to enslave the outer colonies. Jake had been there for the final battle above Mars when they used the quantum bombs for the first time. The memory of entire enemy fleets vanishing in bright flashes still kept him awake at night. The ship's communications officer, Lieutenant Paul Hayes, turned from his station with a confused expression. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission on frequencies we've never seen before. The signal is coming from directly ahead of us." Jake moved to the command chair and activated the main screen. Empty space filled the display, showing nothing but distant stars. "Are you sure about the location, Hayes?" "Positive, sir. The signal is strong and getting stronger. It's like something big is out there, but our sensors aren't picking up anything." Suddenly, the space in front of them began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The shimmer grew larger and brighter until it formed into the shape of a massive ship unlike anything humans had ever built. The vessel looked like it was made of liquid silver that flowed and changed shape constantly. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that almost looked like breathing. "All stop," Jake ordered. His heart was racing, but his voice remained steady. "Hayes, can you translate that signal?" "Working on it, sir. The computer is trying to make sense of the patterns." Hayes paused as information scrolled across his screen. "Sir, I think it's trying to communicate. The patterns are becoming more regular, like it's learning our language from our radio transmissions." The main screen flickered and then displayed a new image. A being appeared that looked like it was made of living crystal. Its body was translucent and constantly shifted colors from blue to green to purple. When it spoke, the words came through their translation system in perfect English, though the voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Greetings, vessel of the third planet of this system. I am Ambassador Zethkalar of the Galactic Council Diplomatic Corps. We have been monitoring your species since you first sent radio signals into space. Recent events in your system have required us to make direct contact." Jake stood up slowly, knowing that this moment would change human history forever. "I am Commander Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Endeavour. We welcome contact with your people, Ambassador." The crystal being's colors shifted to what looked like a pleased pattern. "Your willingness to communicate is noted favorably, Commander Morrison. However, we must discuss certain concerns that have brought us to your system at this time." "What kind of concerns?" Jake asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. 3 of your months ago, our sensors detected massive gravitational disturbances and exotic energy signatures from your system. These readings are consistent with advanced weapons technology being used in large-scale conflict. The Galactic Council has strict protocols regarding species that engage in warfare, especially those that possess weapons capable of planetary destruction. Jake felt his stomach drop. The quantum weapons they had used against the hegemony forces had torn holes in space itself. Of course, advanced aliens would have detected them. "Ambassador, we were defending our colonies from an invasion by a tyrannical force that sought to enslave our people. We used those weapons only as a last resort." The alien's colors shifted to darker shades. "You admit to possessing and using weapons of mass destruction against members of your own species?" "They weren't our own species," Jake said quickly. The hegemony was a group of human separatists who had modified themselves with advanced technology. They declared war on Earth and began attacking civilian populations on Mars and the outer colonies. We tried diplomatic solutions first, but they refused all attempts at negotiation. Zethkalar's form pulsed with what looked like deep thought. "Tell me more about this conflict, Commander. The Council must understand the full scope of what occurred." Jake took a deep breath and began to explain the war that had nearly destroyed human civilization. The hegemony had started as a small group of colonists who believed that genetic Modification and technological augmentation were the keys to human evolution. Over time, they had become more radical, eventually declaring that unmodified humans were inferior and needed to be controlled or eliminated. The war lasted 4 years, Jake continued. They attacked civilian targets, enslaved entire colonies, and conducted experiments on prisoners. When they launched their final assault on Mars, where 3 million civilians lived, we had no choice but to use our most powerful weapons. The ambassador's colors continued to darken as Jake spoke. And these quantum weapons you used, they are still in your possession? Yes, but only as a deterrent. We hope never to use them again. Commander Morrison, in the 50,000 years of the Galactic Council's existence, we have maintained peace through careful species integration and strict oversight of dangerous technologies. Species that wage war upon themselves, regardless of the reasons, pose a significant risk to galactic stability. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. We didn't wage war on ourselves. We defended innocent people from murderers and tyrants. Would you have us stand by while millions died? The Council's position is that there are always alternatives to violence, Commander. Advanced civilizations find ways to resolve conflicts without resorting to weapons that can destroy entire worlds. And what if those alternatives fail? Jake asked. What if you face an enemy that will only understand force? Zethkalar's form flickered between colors rapidly, which Jake was beginning to understand meant the alien was troubled. Such situations are considered extremely rare, Commander. The Council has protocols for dealing with truly aggressive species, but these protocols do not involve the level of destruction your weapons are capable of. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. They were all listening intently, knowing that their answers here would determine humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. Ambassador, may I ask how many species belong to your council? 847 species are currently full members, with over 2,000 associate members and protected worlds under council guidance. And how many of those species had to fight wars before joining the council? The question seemed to surprise Zethkalar. The alien's colors shifted to patterns Jake hadn't seen before. That information is not typically shared during first contact discussions, Commander. But some of them did fight wars, didn't they? Not every species in the galaxy evolved to be naturally peaceful. The path to peace is different for every species, Zethkalar admitted carefully. However, species that demonstrate a pattern of violence, especially recent violence, require extensive evaluation before they can be considered for council membership. Jake realized that humanity was being judged not just on their recent actions but on their entire nature as a species. What does this evaluation involve? You and selected members of your crew will be transported to Council Station for a formal hearing. Representatives from multiple council species will review your case and determine whether humanity is suitable for integration into galactic civilization. And if we're found unsuitable? Zethkalar's colors became very still, which somehow seemed more ominous than the rapid shifting. Unsuitable species are typically restricted to their home systems and monitored to ensure they do not pose a threat to neighboring civilizations. In extreme cases, more direct intervention may be necessary. The bridge fell silent as the implications of those words sank in. Jake understood that they weren't just being invited to join an interstellar community. They were being evaluated as a potential threat that might need to be contained or eliminated. How long do we have to prepare for this evaluation? Jake asked. Transportation to Council Station will be provided immediately. You may bring 2 additional crew members to serve as representatives of your species. Choose carefully, Commander Morrison. The decisions made in the coming days will determine the future of humanity among the stars. Jake looked at his crew again, seeing the mix of excitement and fear in their faces. Humanity had finally made contact with alien life, but instead of the peaceful first contact they had always imagined, they found themselves on trial for the very actions that had saved their civilization. I'll need some time to select my team and prepare our case, Jake said. You have one of your hours, Commander. The Council does not wait, and other matters require our attention throughout the galaxy. as Zethkalar's image faded from the screen. Jake realized that the war that had ended 3 months ago was still echoing through space, and those echoes might determine whether humanity had a future among the stars or would be trapped forever in their own small corner of the galaxy. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the massive Council station, watching ships from dozens of different worlds come and go through the busy traffic patterns. 2 weeks had passed since their first meeting with Ambassador Zethkalar, and Jake still couldn't believe the size of this place. The station stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, its surface covered with structures that seemed to grow rather than be built. Organic curves and flowing lines made it look more like a living creature than a space station. Dr. Lisa Carter joined him at the viewing window, her tablet full of notes about the various alien species they had encountered since arriving. As humanity's cultural expert, she had been working around the clock to understand the complex social structures of the Galactic Council. "The more I learn about this place, the more complicated it gets," she said, rubbing her tired eyes. "Any luck figuring out how their government actually works?" Jake asked. "It's like trying to understand a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape. There are councils within councils, and each species seems to have different levels of influence based on factors I can't even identify." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Counselor Vextari, the jellyfish-like being who had been assigned as their guide. The alien floated through the air on currents that seemed to exist only around its translucent body. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in their minds rather than being heard through their ears. "Commander Morrison, Dr. Carter, it is time for your formal evaluation hearing. Please follow me to the Chamber of Judgment." They walked through corridors that pulsed with soft light, passing aliens of every imaginable shape and size. Jake saw beings made of what looked like living metal, others that seemed to be pure energy contained in force fields, and creatures so strange that his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The diversity was overwhelming, but he noticed something troubling. Despite their vast differences, all of these aliens moved with a kind of careful politeness, as if they were afraid of causing offense. The Chamber of Judgment took Jake's breath away. It was a massive amphitheater that could have held 1,000,000 beings, with sections designed for different atmospheric and gravitational needs. Some areas were filled with water for aquatic species, others glowed with intense heat for beings that lived near stars, and still others were kept in complete darkness for creatures that had evolved without light. At the center of the chamber sat High Counselor Morden, an ancient turtle-like being whose shell was covered with intricate patterns that seemed to tell stories. The counselor's eyes were incredibly old and wise, but Jake could see weariness in them as well, as if they had seen too much over the centuries. "Humans of the third planet," Morden's voice echoed through the chamber without any visible speaking device. "You stand before the Galactic Council to be judged for membership in our peaceful alliance. Speak your names and purposes." Jake stepped forward, feeling the weight of nearly 1,000 alien gazes upon him. "I am Commander Jake Morrison of the United Earth Forces. This is Dr. Lisa Carter, our cultural specialist. We come seeking understanding and friendship with the peoples of the galaxy." "Friendship," repeated a voice from the section reserved for energy beings. "Yet you bring the stench of death and destruction with you. Our sensors detected the screams of the dying across the void during your recent war." Jake felt his face flush with anger, but Dr. Carter placed a gentle hand on his arm. She stepped forward and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Honored members of the Council, we understand your concerns about our recent conflict. However, we believe there are important details about our situation that must be considered." A creature that looked like a giant insect with dozens of legs clicked rapidly, and their translation devices converted the sounds into words. "Details do not change the fundamental nature of a species. You have shown that you will use weapons capable of destroying entire worlds. This makes you unsuitable for peaceful coexistence." Dr. Carter pulled out her tablet and activated a holographic display showing images of human colonies before the war. These were our people living peacefully on Mars and in the outer colonies. Families, children, scientists, artists, all working together to build new homes among the stars. The hologram changed to show the destruction caused by hegemony attacks. Burning cities, enslaved populations, and the horrific experiments conducted on prisoners. The hegemony forces gave us no choice. They declared that unmodified humans were inferior and needed to be eliminated or controlled. They attacked civilian targets and showed no mercy to the innocent. A plant-like being that communicated through chemical releases sent out a pattern that was translated as skepticism. All violent species claim they fight in self-defense. How? Do we know you are not simply the victors writing history to make yourselves look justified? Jake couldn't stay quiet any longer. Because we have records of our attempts at peaceful resolution. We tried negotiation, economic sanctions, and diplomatic intervention for 3 years before the war began. The hegemony responded by increasing their attacks on civilian populations. High Counselor Morden raised a massive claw for silence. Young human, your passion is noted, but passion itself is often the root of violence. The Council has maintained peace for 50,000 years through careful consideration and patient negotiation. There is always an alternative to warfare. Always? Jake asked. What about when the alternative is watching innocent people die? What about when your enemy refuses to listen to reason and only respects force? The chamber erupted in clicking, chirping, and chemical releases as hundreds of species responded to Jake's words. The translation devices struggled to keep up with the flood of alien languages, but the general message was clear. The council members were disturbed by humanity's willingness to use violence, a being that looked like living crystal, similar to Ambassador Zethkalar but much larger, spoke in tones that made the air itself vibrate. This is exactly what we feared. Humans see violence as an acceptable solution to problems. They do not understand the true nature of civilization. Dr. Carter tried to regain control of the situation. Respected council members, humans are capable of great peace and cooperation. We have created art, literature, music, and scientific discoveries that could benefit all species. Our capacity for violence does not define us any more than a knife defines a surgeon. But a surgeon who is too quick to cut may kill the patient rather than heal them, replied an aquatic being from one of the water-filled sections. We have seen what happens when warrior species are allowed to spread among the stars. The results are always catastrophic. High Counselor Morden's ancient eyes focused on Jake with an intensity that made him feel like his soul was being examined. Tell us, Commander Morrison, if you were faced with a situation where peaceful resolution was possible, but would take many years to achieve, while a violent solution could solve the problem immediately, which would you choose? Jake thought carefully about his answer. He could feel the entire chamber waiting for his response, and he knew that whatever he said would have massive consequences for humanity's future. I would try the peaceful solution first, but if people were dying while we waited, I would have to consider the violent option to save lives. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the constant background hum of the station system seemed to fade away. High Counselor Morden's expression was unreadable as he processed Jake's words. Commander Morrison, Dr. Carter, the ancient being, finally said, your honesty is both admirable and troubling. The Council must now deliberate on humanity's fitness for membership in our alliance. However, given the concerning nature of your responses, you will first undergo the trial of intent. What is the trial of intent? Dr. Carter asked. It is a process that has been used for species whose nature is ... questionable. You will be presented with scenarios that test your decision-making abilities and moral compass. The trial will determine whether humanity can be trusted with the responsibilities that come with council membership. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What happens if we fail this trial? High Counselor Morden's eyes grew even more serious. Failure would mean that humanity is deemed too dangerous for integration into galactic civilization. Such species are typically restricted to their home systems and monitored to ensure they pose no threat to peaceful worlds. The ancient being paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. In the most extreme cases, Species that refuse to accept these restrictions and continue to pose a threat to galactic peace must be dealt with more permanently. The chamber remained silent as the implications of those words sank in. Jake realized that they weren't just fighting for humanity's right to join the galactic community. They were fighting for humanity's right to exist as a free species. When does this trial begin? Jake asked, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. Immediately, High Counselor Morden replied. The Council does not delay when dealing with potential threats to galactic stability. You will be escorted to the trial chambers, where you will face scenarios that have tested many species before you. As Counselor Vextari began to guide them out of the chamber, Commander Jake Morrison sat in the small waiting chamber with Dr. Lisa Carter, both of them trying to understand what they had gotten themselves into. The room was simple compared to the grand spaces they had seen elsewhere on the station, with plain walls that shifted color slowly from blue to green to purple. They had been waiting for 3 hours since leaving the council chamber, and the uncertainty was wearing on both of them. The door opened with a soft hiss, and their third team member walked in. Administrator Chun Wei had been kept in separate quarters since their arrival, and Jake was relieved to see her again. June had served as Earth's intelligence analyst for the diplomatic mission, and her sharp mind for details had already proven valuable. Jake, Lisa, I'm glad to see you're both okay, Chun said, but her expression was troubled. I've been studying the Council's archives, and I've discovered some disturbing information about this trial of intent. What kind of information? Doctor Carter asked. Chen pulled out her tablet and showed them files she had managed to access. I've found records of 17 other species that underwent this trial in the past 1,000 years. Only 4 of them were accepted into the Council as full members. The others were either rejected completely or accepted under severe restrictions. Jake leaned forward to look at the data. What kind of restrictions? Their technology was limited. Their territory was confined to specific areas, and they were required to accept Council observers on all their worlds. Basically, they became junior members with no real voice in galactic affairs. Dr. Carter frowned as she read through the files. This doesn't make sense. Why would advanced civilizations accept such limiting conditions? Because the alternative was worse, Chun said quietly. 3 species that refused the restrictions were declared threats to galactic peace. Their home systems were surrounded by Council forces and completely isolated from the rest of the galaxy. One species tried to break free from the isolation, and their entire civilization was destroyed. The room fell silent as the weight of Chun's words sank in. Jake felt anger building in his chest again, the same anger that had carried him through the darkest days of the Martian War. So this isn't really a trial at all. It's a way to break us down until we accept whatever scraps they're willing to give us. Before Chin could respond, the door opened again and Counselor Vextari floated in. Humans, it is time for your trial to begin. Please follow me to the simulation chambers. They walked through more corridors until they reached a section of the station that felt different from the rest. The walls here were made of a dark metal that seemed to absorb light, and there were no other aliens in sight. Heavy security doors required special access codes to open, and Jake noticed weapons scanners built into the walls. This area is restricted to Council security operations, Vextari explained as they walked. The trial simulations are considered highly classified because they recreate actual historical events that the Council prefers to keep private. They entered a large chamber filled with advanced equipment that Jake didn't recognize. In the center was a platform surrounded by projectors that could create perfect 3-dimensional images. High Counselor Morden was already waiting for them, along with several other council members Jake hadn't seen before. Humans, Morden said in his ancient voice, you will now face the trial of intent. You will be placed in command of Council forces during 3 of the most challenging crises in galactic history. You must prove that you can handle these situations without resorting to the violent methods your species seems to favor. What exactly does that mean? Jake asked. You will have access to all the diplomatic, economic, and technological resources that the Council possessed during these events. However, you will not be permitted to use any form of military force or aggressive action. You must find peaceful solutions to problems that threaten the very existence of galactic civilization. Dr. Carter stepped forward. And if we can't find peaceful solutions? Morden eyes grew cold. Then you will have proven that humanity is unsuitable for membership in a peaceful galactic community. The first simulation began immediately. Jake found himself standing on the bridge of a massive council fleet, with holographic displays showing star charts and tactical information. The scenario was labeled The Devourer Crisis minus 23,000 years ago. A council advisor appeared next to him, explaining the situation in urgent tones. Commander Morrison, the Devourer entities have consumed 3 star systems in the past month. They are beings of pure energy that feed on the life force of entire planets. Traditional diplomatic contact is impossible because they do not communicate in any way we understand. Our peaceful overtures have been completely ignored. Jake watched in horror as the simulation showed worlds being drained of all life, their surfaces turning gray and lifeless as the Devourer entities fed. Billions of people were dying and more systems were under immediate threat. What resources do I have available? Jake asked. The full council fleet is at your disposal, along with our most advanced scientists and diplomats. However, you must find a solution that does not involve direct aggression against the Devourer entities. Jake tried everything he could think of. He attempted to establish communication using every method the council had developed. He offered the Devourers alternative energy sources, hoping to satisfy their hunger without destroying inhabited worlds. He tried to create barriers around threatened systems to keep the entities away. Nothing worked. The Devourers continued their systematic destruction of entire star systems while Jake was forced to watch helplessly. The simulation ended with the message that 12 billion sentient beings had died while he searched for a peaceful solution that did not exist. The second simulation was even worse. Jake found himself dealing with a plague that was spreading across multiple worlds. The disease was engineered by a now extinct species as a final weapon before their civilization collapsed. It affected only certain types of brain chemistry, driving infected individuals to extreme violence before killing them. You must contain this plague without using quarantine procedures that would violate the civil rights of healthy populations, the council advisor explained. Forced isolation is considered a form of violence under council law. Jake watched as the plague spread from world to world while he tried to find a cure. He poured resources into medical research and attempted to treat the infected through voluntary programs. But the voluntary nature of the treatment meant that many infected individuals refused help, and they continued to spread the disease to others. The simulation ended with over 50 inhabited worlds falling to the plague, their populations either dead or driven insane by the infection. The message stated that this outcome could have been prevented with immediate quarantine procedures, but such measures were not acceptable to the Council's peaceful principles. The third simulation broke Jake's heart completely. He was put in command of Council forces during something called the Silence Wars, when a telepathic species had tried to forcibly merge all galactic consciousness into a single hive mind. The enemy could turn entire populations into willing slaves with a single telepathic broadcast. You must stop this threat without using weapons against the telepathic species, the advisor told him. Violence against sentient beings is absolutely forbidden, even when those beings are attempting to destroy free will throughout the galaxy. Jake tried to develop defensive technology to block the telepathic signals. He attempted to negotiate with the telepathic species, hoping to find some compromise. He even tried to evacuate entire star systems to keep populations away from the enemy's influence, but every attempt at a peaceful solution failed because the enemy was not interested in compromise. They believed that individual consciousness was a disease that needed to be cured through forced unity. While Jake searched for diplomatic solutions, world after world fell under telepathic control, their populations becoming mindless servants of the hive mind. The simulation ended with the message that Galactic civilization would have been completely destroyed if the Council had continued to follow their peaceful principles during this crisis. Jake stood on the simulation platform, breathing heavily and feeling sick to his stomach. He had just watched 3 scenarios where peaceful solutions were not just ineffective, but actually made the problems worse by allowing them to continue unchecked. High Counselor Morden approached him with an expression that Jake couldn't read. Well, Commander Morrison, you have experienced the 3 greatest challenges the Council has faced in our long history. What is your assessment of your performance? Jake looked directly into the ancient being's eyes, no longer caring about diplomatic niceties. My assessment is that this trial is designed to fail. You put me in situations where peaceful solutions don't exist, then blame me when people die because I'm not allowed to take effective action. And what would you have done differently? Morden asked. I would have used controlled military force to stop the Devourers before they could consume more systems. I would have implemented immediate quarantine procedures to contain the plague, even if it meant restricting people's freedom temporarily. And I would have developed weapons specifically designed to counter the telepathic threat. Commander Jake Morrison stared at High Counselor Morden in complete shock. The ancient being had just admitted that the Galactic Council had used the same violent methods they were condemning humanity for. The simulation chamber felt suddenly cold, and Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the silence that followed. You used violence to solve these problems? Dr. Lisa Carter asked, her voice barely above a whisper. But you've been telling us that violence is never acceptable. Morden's ancient eyes showed something Jake had never expected to see in a council member. Shame. The truth is more complicated than our current teachings suggest, Dr. Carter. The Galactic Council was not founded by peaceful species coming together in harmony. We are the survivors of the greatest war the galaxy has ever known. Shunwei stepped forward, her tablet still showing the historical records she had been studying. I found references to something called the Fracture Wars in the restricted archives, but most of the information was classified beyond my access level. The Fracture Wars, Morden repeated the name like it caused him physical pain. 50,000 years ago, our galaxy was torn apart by conflicts between dozens of advanced species. Entire star systems were destroyed, artificial black holes were created as weapons, and reality itself was damaged by technologies that should never have existed. Jake felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. The Council wasn't formed to maintain peace. It was formed by the survivors who were too traumatized by war to ever fight again. Precisely, Morden said. When the wars finally ended, the surviving species were so horrified by what they had done that they swore to never again resort to violence. We created the Council as a way to ensure that such destruction could never happen again. But what about those 3 crises you showed us? Chunwei asked. The Devourers, the plague, the telepathic invasion. You said the Council used violent solutions. Morden was quiet for a long moment before answering. Those events occurred in the early years after the Fracture Wars, when some Council members still remembered how to fight. Each time, we told ourselves it was the last time we would ever use such methods. After the Silence Wars ended, we made the decision to completely abandon all military capabilities. Dr. Carter pulled up her own notes on her tablet. That explains what I've been observing about Council species behavior. You haven't just avoided violence, you've systematically removed your ability to commit violence at all. The process took thousands of years, Morden admitted. We destroyed our weapons, disbanded our military forces, and even modified our own biology in some cases to make aggression nearly impossible. We believed this was the only way to ensure lasting peace. Jake looked around the simulation chamber, noting the heavy security and restricted access. But you kept records of these events. And you still test new species using scenarios that require violent solutions. Why? Before Morden could answer, the chamber's doors opened and several new figures entered. These aliens were different from any council members Jake had seen before. They moved with confidence and alertness that reminded him of military personnel. Their equipment was clearly advanced, and some of them carried what looked like weapons. Because some of us never forgot that the galaxy is not as peaceful as the Council pretends it to be, said the leader of the new group. This being looked like a combination of metal and flesh, with cybernetic enhancements that gleamed under the chamber's lights. I am General Kane of the Iron Collective. We represent what your species might call the Shadow Council. Chinwei's eyes widened as she recognized the name from her research. The Iron Collective was listed as a minor council member with limited technology rights. But you clearly have advanced military capabilities. The official records are deliberately misleading, General Kane explained. For the past 10,000 years, a small group of council species have secretly maintained our military abilities while publicly supporting the pacifist policies. We knew that someday the galaxy would face threats that diplomacy could not handle. Dr. Carter looked between Morden and General Kane, trying to understand the political situation. So there are two different factions within the council? Those who truly believe in absolute pacifism and those who secretly prepare for war. 3 factions, actually, said another newcomer, a being that seemed to be made of living shadow. I am Voidwalker Prime. We represent the species that have been conducting covert operations beyond council space for millennia. We have been watching the galaxy's borders, and what we have found is deeply troubling. Jake felt his military instincts awakening as he processed this information. What kind of threats are you talking about? Voidwalker Prime gestured, and the simulation equipment activated to show a map of the galaxy. Most of it was marked in the blue color that represented council space, but Jake could see large red areas along the outer edges. 3 separate galactic empires have been expanding toward council territory for the past 5,000 years. They are not interested in diplomacy or peaceful coexistence. The map zoomed in to show massive fleets of alien warships, worlds turned into military fortresses and technologies that made human quantum weapons look primitive. The Burning Legion enslaves entire species and uses them as expendable soldiers. The Hive Imperium consumes all biological matter to fuel their expansion. The Machine Dynasty converts all organic life into cybernetic servants. General Kane stepped forward to add more details. Additionally, our deep space monitors have detected signs of extra-dimensional incursions. Beings from other realities are beginning to probe our universe, and their intentions appear hostile. Morden's ancient form seemed to shrink as he listened to this information. The traditional council members refuse to acknowledge these threats. They believe that if we remain peaceful and avoid provoking these forces, they will leave us alone. And you disagree? Jake asked. We know better, Voidwalker Prime replied. We have been fighting small skirmishes along the galactic rim for centuries, trying to slow their advance without alerting the main council. But our resources are limited, and we cannot hold them back forever. Dr. Carter was taking notes rapidly as she processed the implications. This is why humanity's arrival has caused such controversy. You need allies who are willing and able to fight. But the traditional council members see any military capability as a threat to their way of life. Exactly, General Kane confirmed. Your species represents something the galaxy has not seen. In 50,000 years, a people who understand both the necessity of war and the value of peace. You fight when you must, but you also know when to stop fighting? Jake looked at the tactical displays showing the approaching threats. His mind was already working on defensive strategies and resource allocation, the skills that had carried him through the Martian War. How much time do we have before these empires reach council space? The Burning Legion will arrive at our outer colonies within 5 years, Voidwalker Prime said. The other 2 empires are perhaps a decade behind them, and the extra-dimensional incursions are becoming more frequent each year. The traditional council will never authorize the military preparations needed to face these threats, Morden said sadly. They would rather surrender than admit that violence is sometimes necessary for survival. Chenwei looked up from her tablet where she had been calculating numbers. The Council has nearly 1,000 member species and controls thousands of star systems. Even if only a fraction of them were willing to contribute to a defense force, the resources would be enormous. Resources without the will to use them effectively are meaningless, General Kane replied. We need leaders who understand warfare, technologies designed for combat rather than peaceful exploration. And most importantly, we need species willing to make the hard choices that war requires. Jake realized that the conversation had shifted. From humanity being judged by the Council to the Council asking for humanity's help. You want us to help you convince the traditional members to militarize? We want you to become the catalyst for change that the galaxy desperately needs, Void. Walker Prime said. Your species could serve as the bridge between the pacifist majority and those of us who have maintained our warrior capabilities. Dr. Carter frowned as she considered the political implications. But if we align ourselves with the Shadow Council, we'll be seen as a threat by the traditional members. We could end up starting the very conflict within the Council that we're trying to avoid. The conflict is coming whether we start it or not, General Kane said grimly. The question is whether the galaxy will be prepared when it arrives, or whether 50,000 years of enforced pacifism will lead to the extinction of galactic civilization. Jake looked around the chamber at the representatives of different factions, each with their own agenda and fears. Humanity had come here seeking acceptance into a peaceful galactic community, but instead they had discovered a civilization on the brink of civil war over how to face external threats. What exactly are you proposing? Jake asked. Morden stepped forward, and for the first time since Jake had met him, the ancient being looked like the leader of a galactic government rather than a tired old creature burdened by history. Commander Jake Morrison stood in the center of the simulation chamber, surrounded by representatives of 3 different factions within the Galactic Council. The weight of their decision would affect not just humanity's future, but the survival of galactic civilization itself. He looked at Dr. Lisa Carter and Chun Wei, seeing his own mix of determination and uncertainty reflected in their faces. Before we make any decisions, Jake said carefully, I need to understand exactly what we're being asked to do. You want humanity to become the leaders of a military force that half the council doesn't even know exists? High Counselor Morden nodded slowly. The traditional council members believe that military preparation leads inevitably to military aggression. They fear that creating defenses will somehow provoke the very conflicts we seek to avoid. General Kane of the Iron Collective stepped forward, his cybernetic enhancements gleaming under the chamber's lights. Meanwhile, the external threats continue to grow stronger while we debate philosophy. Our covert operations have slowed their advance, but we cannot hold them back indefinitely without proper support. Shen Wei had been studying the tactical displays while the others talked. The numbers don't look good. Even if every council species contributed ships and personnel, we'd still be outnumbered by the approaching fleets. How do you expect to win a defensive war against such overwhelming odds? That's exactly why we need humanity, Voidwalker Prime replied. The shadow beings form shifting with what seemed like excitement. Council species have forgotten how to think strategically about warfare. We have advanced technology and vast resources, but we lack the tactical innovation that comes from recent combat experience. Dr. Carter pulled up her notes about council species behavior. I've been analyzing the psychological profiles of various member species, and I think I understand the problem. 50,000 years of enforced pacifism hasn't just removed their weapons, it's removed their ability to think creatively about conflict resolution. Jake nodded as he processed this information. During the Martian War, humanity's greatest advantage hadn't been their weapons or numbers, but their ability to adapt quickly to changing situations and find unconventional solutions to tactical problems. You need us to teach your people how to fight effectively, not just how to use weapons. More than that, General Kane said. We need you to help us convince the traditional council that defense is not the same as aggression. That preparing for war can actually prevent war by deterring potential attackers. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's communication system activated with an urgent alert. The voice that came through belonged to Ambassador Zeth Kalar, the crystal being who had first made contact with humanity. All council members are required to report to the Grand Assembly immediately. We have received communications from beyond our borders and the situation has become critical. The group moved quickly through the station's corridors toward the massive Grand Assembly Hall. Jake noticed that other aliens throughout the station seemed agitated, moving with more urgency than he had seen during their stay. When they reached the Assembly Hall, Jake was amazed to see that it was even larger than the Chamber of Judgment, with space for representatives from all nearly 1,000 council species. The main display screen at the center of the hall showed an image that made Jake's blood run cold. It was a recording from one of the outer council colonies, showing massive ships descending through the atmosphere. The ships were black as space itself, with designs that looked like they were meant to inspire terror rather than serve any practical purpose. High Counselor Morden took his place at the center of the assembly as thousands of alien voices fell silent. Fellow council members, 3 hours ago we lost contact with the Harmony colony in the Outer Rim territories. Before contact was lost, they transmitted this recording. The display showed scenes of destruction as the black ships began attacking the colony's peaceful settlements. The weapons they used didn't just destroy buildings, they seemed to drain the very life from everything they touched. Plants withered, animals collapsed, and the colony's inhabitants fell to the ground as their life force was somehow extracted. The Burning Legion has arrived ahead of our projections, Morden continued. They have begun their assault on Council territory, and our outer colonies are defenseless against their life-draining technology. The assembly erupted into chaos as hundreds of species began communicating at once through their various methods. The translation system struggled to keep up with the flood of clicks, chemical releases, telepathic broadcasts, and other forms of alien communication. Through the chaos, Jake could make out expressions of fear, panic, and desperate calls for action. A council member that looked like a giant flower spoke through chemical releases that were translated as urgent demands. We must evacuate all Outer Rim colonies immediately and pull back to the inner territories, where our defensive stations can protect us. Evacuation will only delay the inevitable, replied a crystalline being similar to Zethkalar. The Burning Legion consumes everything in its path. Retreating will only give them more worlds to feed upon. Dr. Carter leaned close to Jake and whispered, "This is exactly what the Shadow Council was warning about. The traditional members want to run away instead of fighting back." High Counselor Morden raised his voice to restore order. The immediate question before this assembly is how to respond to this attack. I call for proposals from all member species. For the next hour, Jake listened as species after species proposed increasingly desperate plans. Some wanted to abandon the outer territories entirely and create a defensive perimeter around the core worlds. Others suggested trying to negotiate with the Burning Legion, offering them uninhabited worlds in exchange for peace. A few proposed using advanced technology to hide Council worlds from detection. None of the proposals involved fighting back. Finally, Jake could stand it no longer. He stepped forward into the speaking area, knowing that as a non-member he had no right to address the assembly. The hall fell silent as thousands of alien eyes focused on the human who dared to interrupt their proceedings. Honored council members, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. I have listened to your proposals, and I understand your desire to avoid violence. But I must tell you that everything you have suggested will ultimately fail. A wave of shocked communications swept through the assembly. Several species began protesting that a non-member had no right to speak, but High Counselor Morden gestured for silence. Explain your reasoning, Commander Morrison, the ancient leader said. The Burning Legion isn't interested in negotiation or coexistence. They're conquerors who feed on the life force of other beings. Offering them uninhabited worlds is like offering a hungry predator empty plates when what they want is the meat. Jake activated his own tablet and projected tactical information onto the main display. Retreating to the core worlds will only concentrate your populations in smaller areas, making it easier for them to harvest more life force with each attack. And hiding your worlds might work temporarily, but they'll eventually find you. Doctor. Carter stepped forward to support him. Commander Morrison is correct. Based on the behavior patterns we've observed, the Burning Legion views peaceful species as prey, not potential allies. They interpret your peaceful overtures as signs of weakness. Then what do you propose, humans? Called out a voice from the aquatic section. If diplomacy and withdrawal are doomed to fail, what alternatives exist? Jake took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either save galactic civilization or destroy humanity's chances of ever being accepted by the Council. You fight back. You use every advantage you have in technology, numbers, and resources to stop them before they can establish a foothold in Council space. The assembly erupted in even greater chaos than before. Some species were outraged at the suggestion of warfare, while others seemed to be considering the possibility for the first time in millennia. General Kane chose that moment to reveal himself and the Shadow Council's existence to the broader assembly. The human is correct. Some of us have been preparing for this day for thousands of years, maintaining our defensive capabilities while respecting the Council's peaceful principles. The revelation that a shadow military had been operating within the Council sent shockwaves through the assembly. Species that had trusted in absolute pacifism suddenly realized that some of their fellow members had been secretly preparing for war. Chunwei stepped forward with her research data. The historical records show that every time the Council has faced an existential threat, survival required abandoning pacifist principles temporarily. The choice isn't between peace and war, it's between defending yourselves and being destroyed. Hi. Counselor Morden looked older than his thousands of years as he contemplated the decision before them. The Council has maintained peace for 50,000 years by rejecting the path of violence. What you propose would fundamentally change who we are as a civilization. The Burning Legion is going to change who you are anyway, Jake replied. The question is whether you'll change by choosing to defend innocent lives or by being conquered and enslaved by beings who see your peaceful nature as an invitation to feed.